Hello, everyone. It's been a hell of a last 2.5 years, and we've been working throughout the pandemic, really focusing on the projects that we developed with Creative Europe. And a lot of what I'm going to be showing you today is some of the new products that we're putting out into the market. Um, but like any good positioning, you should always start with looking at where we are and the problems that we're all facing within the industry. So across Europe, we're seeing recovery, but it's not moving as quickly as we'd like it to, and particularly we're feeling it hardest in the independent sphere. Um, I think whatever trends that were beginning to sort of emerge before the pandemic have been exacerbated. And although we're seeing certain movies do very, very well, the majority of films are failing to find their audiences and their revenues in time. And this competition is being felt by everyone. I know, we're all in this together as distributors, but the cinema side of the industry has been receiving some, fairly massive shocks. We've had the Chapter 11 filing for Cineworld, and then in Scotland, where I'm from, when we looked at a city breakdown, Edinburgh Film, the Edinburgh Film House in Edinburgh, obviously just also filed their Chapter 11 filing and went into receivership. But when we looked at the stats, we found that places like Aberdeen, 29 out of the 29 locations there are also in similar trouble. So, we have a great deal of challenges still to navigate our ways through. And that is also exacerbated by the fact that one of the things that popped out of the pandemic was the bigger blockbusters, the bigger films do drive interest and, the audience desire to go to the cinema. So as we continue to be hit by these issues with the slate, the cinema industry is obviously suffering in terms of getting people back in. And I think it's an important concept to start developing here is that we're a part of an ecosystem, and a very important one culturally, but it is an ecosystem. It is a consortium of companies that are facing these challenges together. And so what I'm hoping by the end of today is that we can start to think a little bit more about how we get around these issues as an industry. I read a very scary statistic from one of the Sundance reports that out of the $3 billion that had been funded into production, the films in 2019 in the independent sphere only returned $100 million in terms of theatrical revenue. And so there's something disproportionately wrong, particularly when we look at things like piracy data, because when if anyone has encountered Muso, the piracy tracking tool, I was at the Karlovy Film Festival about 3 or 4 years ago, and they released the data around how many people were watching the films illegally. And my fear at that time was perhaps independent film is failing to find its audience because the audience is no longer engaged. And what was very clear was that the audiences are watching these films at huge rates. They're just not watching them legally. So there's a gap. There's some kind of issue that we have to try and address to try and win back those people. So as we can see, the majority of box office worldwide are driven by the majors. And we're facing new challenges with the way that the windows are being set. So, what used to be 90 days across most of Europe is now down to 45 or 30. So we have tighter windows to work within before things move over to the home entertainment window. And that data starts to black box. I think one of the reasons why theatrical works so well is because it's the true valuation measure of the film and the content. And without that window, it's very, very difficult to get a read on how your content should be valued in downstream windows. And we have an issue with getting older audiences back, but also the younger audiences. And the younger audiences, particularly in places like Germany, have been in decline for some time now, but it's also being reflected across the rest of the world as well. So, to sum up, we have a situation where competition is increasing. There's more competition for the entertainment wallet than there ever was before. There's more distractions going on than ever before within our audiences. And we're facing some major challenges in terms of keeping the audiences interested in coming back to the cinema over the next few years. And then the other challenges that we face are audience attention is fragmenting into so many different devices now that it's becoming, you guys work on film marketing campaigns. We had the beauty of just having Facebook to really worry about and Google. Now we have Snap, TikTok, Reddit, just a plethora of channels where specific audience interests are going on. And then we have messaging, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, all these different tools that we have to now start to think about in our campaigns. So I want to end this quick introduction. There is hope. Tim League came out with a brilliant quote saying that cinema doesn't really compete with the couch. It competes with other events that are going on in the evening. Going to the restaurant, going to a comedy club. You choose to go out. So cinema, I think, does have a healthy future. There just has to be an element of repositioning. And what we're seeing, particularly in the UK, is cinemas like Everyman actually grew during the pandemic. So when Tenet was released, Everyman actually punched way above its weight in terms of the overall revenue that it delivered for the film. So our customers are potentially becoming more discerning around the experience, and therefore screenings like IMAX, Dolby Atmos, and all the other technologies that are associated with a good experience, plus things like seating, exclusivity of the event, food and dining. These are all things now that the discerning customer is looking for. And the other game changer that's happened is everyone has been forced to sell their tickets online now. So one of the things that I'm hoping that this presentation will deliver is to start to get cinemas and distributors to think about the digital foyer, right? Everyone is very, very obsessed around the real world foyer, but from our experience, when we've looked at a multitude of cinema sites, particularly within the independent sphere, young people are buying tickets using their mobile devices. And if your mobile device is not giving a good online foyer experience, and we've all been there, right? You're in your phone, you're scrolling in, you're trying to type in your credit card number, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So, now that the whole industry has been forced over the last 2 years to sell tickets online, I am seeing a lot of innovation happening within the space. A lot of people reconsidering their websites, a lot of people reconsidering their online foyer experiences. And one of the things that's going to be critical that will be dropping out of this is the concept of audience data. Now, when I say this term, a lot of people get confused and start thinking in all different types of directions. And what I want to really focus on here is the audience data that can be used in a film promotion campaign, as most of the people in this room are distributors, but some of you also have cinemas. So we went to Japan in 2016, and we were looking at it as a market that we potentially wanted to expand into. It's a big film market. It's approximately 100 million people in that market, and it does very well at the box office. And when we sat down with the major studios there, what we found was that they have a system called Panda, which they have had in operation quite a few years. And Panda is a audience data platform that the cinemas utilize by adding their data to, and then the distributors and their agencies can tap into that data to target people who buy tickets and also have an interest in a specific film genre. And as a result, Japan is probably, despite it being a very, very conservative market with a very, very old film tradition, one of the most advanced places in the world when you're doing movie promotions. So we raised money in 2017 to start building the European version of Panda, which we call TAP. Right? TAP is the Audience Project. It's a European audience data platform for European film, although we're now operating internationally. And we went through 3 funding cycles to start to deliver this product. And basically what we find is that when we throw audience data into a campaign, particularly what we've aggregated off cinema sites, but also from our own campaigns, we can improve the sales performance generally between 3 and 6 times. We average around 5. So what does it mean for the concept of audience data within a campaign when we're working with cinemas? And a good example of this is what we've achieved with Nordisk in Norway and Denmark. So essentially, we have taken the cinema site, we've looked at it, we've figured out all the areas that are missing in terms of tracking. We've worked with the cinema to improve their ad operations capabilities, because that's what my team does. And then we then start to put that data into the audience project or TAP, and then we start to expose that data to the distributors that want to work directly with Nordisk for Nordisk campaigns. And the distributors get real-time reporting, as I show, so they'll actually be able to see the campaigns operating in real time with the results in terms of sales. And the cinemas benefit from having audiences directed directly to them for conversion. And a typical integration will be something along the lines of looking at the whole value chain of what the customer does online. Typically, when we start working with cinemas, they'll have tracking about the number of page views and then the number of sales, but they won't have the middle story, like what happens with audiences, how many films do they investigate, what do they investigate, and what's the typical purchase cycle that they're going through. So this massive narrative is actually missing from the marketing. And if it's connected up properly, then you can start to essentially target people around their film interest, but more importantly, around their buying behaviors and what they're buying. And this is all done at scale anonymously. It's all done through pixels, so it's basic standard, retail e-commerce, but just delivered into the film environment. And what that ends up with is a dashboard that runs in the background of the campaign. And actually what you're seeing here is exactly what our ad operations team used to optimize the campaign. But the distributor is also looking at this, and also the cinema. So what typically in the old days used to be something that would be wrapped up into a conversation 3 or 4 weeks after the film had been delivered, as in, we've successfully deployed your money and delivered you X million impressions, suddenly becomes a conversation about what do we do with the creative, what do we do with the targeting, what are the key performance indicators that are showing success or health in this campaign, and how are they looking, and where are we going towards box office? Is this film a flop? Is it going to hit its targets, or is it going to exceed? The other thing about cinema data is it's basically the golden goose for audiences. So I'm just going to quickly show you a campaign here, right? When we're working for a distributor, of course, we're running campaigns in Facebook and all these different channels, but we're selecting, the campaign's own targeting systems. And we use this as the control. So if you can see the 2.41, that means for every penny or dirham or pound or dollar that we're putting into this system, we're getting $2 back, more or less, for the money that we put in, which is good. It does show in this instance, when we ran this campaign, we could track that the social campaigns were returning a profit, which was fantastic. But when we layered in the actual cinemas data from the behaviors, the ticketing behaviors on their site, we saw the conversion rates jump by a factor of 5 to 6 times. And when we modeled that audience to create what's called a lookalike is you take the audience that you like, that you are seeing good results from, and you expand it into the ad platform to reach new people who may not have experienced the film or the cinema yet, but the ad platform, Facebook, Google, TikTok, they have a good idea who might be interested in this film and this purchase behavior. And even in this case, when we scaled out to a further what's the reach of this campaign? Yeah, another 40,000 people, we saw the conversion rate from each dollar that we were putting into the advertising still being at a very, very high level. And this, I think, is where the secret of our industry lies. This is why we have to start thinking as a consortia as an industry. We have to start thinking as across all the releases that the industry is working on and all the cinemas where these films are being shown. Because when you add cinema's box office data into a campaign, your return on advertising spend jumps. And that's just the table just highlighting the difference. So even the lookalike audience, which was nearly 40,000 or 35,000 people, still converted very, very well. I think 3.5, 4 times better than if we were just in Facebook, just running advertising normally. The other thing that comes out of that is, what's going on with the purchasing behaviors, right? A lot of distributors work with briefs, and it's really only when the rubber hits the road that, you start working on the film campaign that your brief is either correct or incorrect. And the box office has this data. So we see a very interesting future where media brief and media planning can be improved by actually looking at the purchase history of the transactions that are happening on the cinema side. And of course, what that also then leads to is, we've all worked on Facebook. It looks like a very cheap way of converting audiences into being interested in films, but sometimes other platforms that come across as being expensive might be the ones that are actually causing people to buy. And we've been working in this industry for nearly 12 years now. The amount of times that we've turned off things like Instagram and Snap because in comparison to Facebook, as we're running into the final week of the campaign, the Facebook numbers were looking cheaper and we were getting more clicks and interactions. When we actually start to connect up to the box office, we see very, very often that these more expensive channels are delivering way more in terms of ticket sales. And in the old days, we would have turned them off. But now that we're starting to get this data in, we can see what is really, really effective for the campaign. And of course, the golden word in all film promotion, creative, right? We spend massive amounts of money, each year developing trailers, developing artwork. We have a big understanding that creative can be as important as targeting, yet it's very, very difficult to actually define which statements, which images, which trailers really drove the conversions, which really delivered the advertising return. And as you can see within our reporting, that's one of the things that we're breaking down here. So effectively, what we've tried to build with TAP is a system that allows you to have a conversation with your agencies or with us to basically improve the quality of the campaign towards a return on advertising spend. And I'm very happy with what we've been doing because it just allows us to figure out what went right, importantly, what went wrong, how we improve for the future, and also can we get a better bead on the ticket buying audience for independent film. And there's a very interesting case study that we wrote about the Polish market, where over the course of a year and a half, we were getting more and more people into the cinema that were interested in indie movies. So one of the other key challenges that we face in the industry is this situation where we invest a lot of money in buying films, we take that risk, we spend months doing the planning, and then we try and get that content out as efficiently as possible with our cinema partners. And we're always relying on the box office reports from the premiere night as the first indication as to whether or not we're on track. And again, looking at the consortia of films, there are patterns that start to emerge that give you an indication early on in the campaign if your film is actually resonating. And this is the next phase of things that we're working on, is to make the dashboards interactive. So there will be flashing lights or green lights when things are good, flashing lights when things are bad, and we'll be calling you to just say, okay, I think we have a problem with this bit of creative, or I don't think this targeting is working well. The other thing that we have to understand is, as distributors, we work like venture capitalists. If you take the concept of venture capitalists, they are investing in 10 to 12 companies over the course of the lifespan of the fund. And out of that, two of the companies will make the lion's share of the money, and the rest will either be below revenue targets or on par, right? With film, we have a similar risk profile. There are 2 or 3 films in our portfolio or slate each year that make the majority of the revenue. And that is unfortunately the nature of creativity in the Pareto distribution. But if you can get a clear indication in your early testing, and if you look at the internet like a massive focus group, there is the opportunity to get insights into, okay, do I need to change my targeting? Do I need to change my creative strategy? Perhaps this angle will work. But if it doesn't, maybe I have bought something that's never going to find its audience. And therefore, maybe it might be an idea to try and cut back on spending and save it for a film where I am seeing success criteria. So there are key performance indicators. And this is a very quick representation. I know this is a lot of numbers, but essentially the thing you have to picture in your mind is the more green, the better. So if all 5 lights light up on the dashboard, you're in for a winner. You should be talking to your cinemas and telling them, look, we need more screens because this is going to be going gangbusters. Similarly, we have a pre-awareness phase before the showtimes become available, and we have a Showtime's phase, right? And we're looking at that behavior, like things like how long did the user watch the video for? Where did they drop out for? Did they share it with their friends? Did they click through to the site? Did they remain on the site at the right kind of levels? All these pre-awareness stats are great for showing on the online health of the campaign. When the ticketing becomes available, that's when we start to see, the real numbers on the movie. But if in the pre-awareness phase, that's why I've highlighted the red box, if the numbers are not up to scratch, it doesn't matter how well people interact with ticketing when it comes down to the film release. The film is not attracting enough audiences to be relevant and actually get people's attention. So we've done a good job of getting people to interact with showtimes, but there just wasn't enough. And that could be a budgeting problem. That could be the fact that the film is so niche that people aren't that interested. But if we got this as part of a live dashboard, then there's at least a chance to have a conversation to fix it. That we're not turning up 3 weeks after the film's released and going, we spent all your money and we delivered this many impressions. And I think that that's the style of thinking that needs to die within this industry, particularly within the agency space. And we're getting better and better at going back to studios now and telling them, okay, we think you're going to be 80% under rate or 110% under rate based on these benchmarks. And we could see, particularly in this film that we released in Australia, that when it came down to the actual interaction rate for the showtimes, we were about half of what we needed to be. But the other indicators were good, meaning that people had interest in the film, and we told them, I think you're going to be around 80 to 90% of your estimate, and lo and behold, we were right. We can also check on the work that your agencies are doing from a brand and awareness perspective, because really, at the end of the day, film marketing needs to move towards performance. It needs to move away from just purely about throwing up as many impressions around your creative. It really needs to start to look at, well, what are the audiences doing with that creative? How are they sharing it? And in this case, we were comparing our campaign to a major media agency working in the space in Australia. And what we saw was that during the campaign, they were throwing out loads of impressions. They had a much bigger budget than us, but the click-through rates, the interest in the film was remaining absolutely flat. And again, this is a good way of checking, am I getting the most out of the money that I'm throwing at this movie? So we're integrated with Vox in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, Palace Cinemas in Australia. We were integrated with Alamo Drafthouse in the US, but unfortunately their Chapter 11 filing in 2021 ended that arrangement. And we're also working with Real Cinemas in the UK and Nordisk in Norway and Denmark. And what we're looking to do is to try and get distributors to talk to their local cinema partners on the independent sphere to kind of get them to understand that there is a bright future out there, but it has to be through a collaboration. So we're set to make those collaborations happen, but just in case we can't, we still have a very powerful tool in the market with the e-commerce feature in it that allows us to get a good read on who's interacting with ticketing. And we can deliver this into things like Facebook, so it's a non-interrupted experience. Someone can watch a trailer within their Twitter profile or the Facebook newsfeed, and we can serve showtimes directly next to that video and then start to record what happens in real time. And just to show you, we believe this works across the windows of the film's release. So we worked on Werewolves Within, and what we found was that by the time we'd started to hone in on the audience for the theatrical campaign, we could reuse that data for the video on demand campaign, and we managed to improve the interaction rates. And when we got the sales data back 3 or 4 months later from the various providers that they'd worked with, we saw that the sales had also done extremely well at that phase of the film too. So there is a life cycle here that we all have to be aware of. Cinema data, though, drives the whole progression. The other thing that we've noticed is that cinema interest and film interest are international behaviors. Has anyone seen our site Eurofilm Launches? Okay. We've not done a very good job then. So Eurofilm Launches is a site that we built for Europa distribution, and it was a way of trying to coordinate across Europe who was working on what and who had the rights to different films, to try and spark a conversation amongst distributors that say, if I'm working in France, but I see that Germany's got the film a month before, I know who to call and who to start trying to get information out of about the film release. What we what we're driving with our European releases is quite often when we start working on a film, we'll be working on it over a course of 3 to 6 months, and it will be in a variety of different territories. And the good news for that is, if we can start to get a bead on the audience, we found that taking a Polish audience models very well into a German audience models very well into a Nordic audience, an Australian audience obviously models very well into an English audience. So this is why I think we have to start looking at the problem as an international consortia, right? Your audience behaviors model very, very well internationally. It means that people with film genre interests in Poland, if you can get your hands on their data for the campaign in Germany, means that you can potentially start by, I think within this industry we have an expression where you throw a lot of mud against the wall and then you see what sticks. Is that similar in German? Do you have a similar saying? Okay, right. So, with this methodology, what you're doing is you're throwing the right amount of mud at the right part of the wall from the early day of the campaign. And as you can see, when we worked on Baby Teeth, we were dramatically improving the click-through rate at each stage of the film's launch throughout Europe. Couple that in with audience buying behaviors, we could have upped the CTR even further if we had cinemas in Poland, for instance. So that's just a very short rundown on TAP. This is what we're all interested in. At the end of the day, it's a common problem that we're all trying to solve. It's all about the bum on the seat. A rising tide lifts all boats. I guess that's a German saying as well, I hope. But I just wanted to finish the presentation. How much longer do I have, by the way? Yeah? Okay. So this is where my... 5 minutes, okay. Okay. Good. Good. All right. So let me just see if I can get this to work. So I wanted to show you some of the new media planning tools that are coming out our side based on the data that we've aggregated across thousands of campaigns now. And so we have a new media planning tool called Houston. Owen, do you want to just stand up quickly and just wave to everyone? So Owen and I are unfortunately only here until tonight. We're both leaving very early in the morning, but Owen is available in the German market. So if any of you guys want to have a chat about any of the things that you've seen today, do feel free to reach out to her, and she can also take you through a live demonstration of this new tool, which we have just released. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this video will work. Here we go. All right. So media planning, very, very important for the film. It's probably one of the areas where I think we're weakest as an industry because we don't have the background data sets to help us in our decision making. So first things first, we've created a tool that allows you to figure out, okay, what is the effective reach on a campaign? How many people for this idea, this topic, this movie actor, this concept will be interested in this film? And this demonstration is just very quick. We're picking actors like Robert Pattinson. Hopefully he's in one of your movies at some point. But essentially, this gives you an idea across the age ranges of who's going to be interested and how many of them there are. And then the other thing that we have is pulling out from our system, and I'm just hoping I can just pause this a second. Is that possible? Never mind. Anyway, when we work on films, everything is being recorded in TAP. So we're recording what happens in the campaign, but also more importantly, what happens in the website experiences that we created. And that allows us to get a perfect read over a number of movies about what is actually going on, which then allows us in the media planning to see what the costs should be, and more importantly, where you should be allocating the money. So in this case, what we're seeing here is that the interactions are better in the mid-tier categories but the costs are very expensive in the younger age groups. Damn it, that was too quick. And then the other thing that we have in here is basically live media planning. So we know the reach, we know the amount of people that we're trying to go out to. Our tools will then start to calculate based on the time of year. If you have a budget, okay, what happens when you adjust the budget around the different channels? And one of the issues in media planning is, you guys will write an email, your agency will come back to you with a plan, you'll make some adjustments. But what about a tool where you could actually just sit down live and go, okay, we know we need to reach 300,000 people in this category. We know what the costs are in each of these category groups. What happens if we do a media mix with Snap and Facebook, but downplay Facebook and upgrade Snap? What's that going to have? And then we can calculate it for you live. So then it just becomes a conversation rather than a black box event. And that's really, I think, at the end of the day, the opportunity that we're facing within the market. There's a consortia approach. If you are friendly with cinemas out there that you work with well, come and get them to talk to us. We can definitely help them from their own ad operations perspectives, because very often what we find is cinemas are not well set up. They're good for SEO, they're good for design, they're good at providing information about the films, but they're usually very, very poor when it comes to this ad operations component that I showed you. That can be very effective. And the second thing is the tracking, the media planning, the interaction around how we progress as an industry around a film is all being wrapped up into TAP, which is our Creative Europe sponsored project. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm trying to channel my inner Steve Jobs, so I hope that was interesting. And if it isn't, and you've got any questions or you're confused by anything, like I said, Owen and I are here today. Thank you.